Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for tuning in for another episode. If you happen to watch my channel on a regular basis, you know how much I like to use vibrating jigs. And it seems like every time I do a vibrating jig video, I get a lot of questions from viewers wanting to know specifically what vibrating jigs I like to throw. And is there one other than the Z-Man jackhammer that's worth throwing? And the answer to that is absolutely. There are a lot of good vibrating jigs on the market. You do not have to just throw a jackhammer. I do like a jackhammer. I do throw a jackhammer a good percentage of the time. But I've got here a couple of baits that I want to talk about that I like to use when the jackhammer is maybe not the best choice. So I'm going to walk you through some of these other vibrating jigs. There's a lot of really good ones on the market. I do feel like most major brands at this point do have a vibrating jig of some form or fashion. They're just they're a great fish catching bait. They're really good at catching big bass. And for me, I'm disappointed in myself because as early as I was on the vibrating jig game when the Z-Man, the Chatterbait first came out, I was probably pretty late to actually figuring out how to use it, and late getting to the point where it was a standard bait for me. Meaning I didn't like it at first. I didn't catch anything. A lot of people were telling me how good it was. I would go out and fish it pretty much with a straight retrieve and not catch anything. It took me a little while to recognize how important your erratic darting motion was to, snap the rod, to impart a lot of action, to clip some weeds, to deflect off cover. That's really where your baits, your best bites come, is from some of that erratic motion. And a straight retrieve, the way I was throwing it early on, was probably the worst way to do it. And that's why I didn't have much success. But I will tell you at this point, a vibrating jig is one of my absolute must-haves in terms of tournament fishing, big bass catching arsenal. I mean, it really is. But it's not just a jackhammer. I've got a bunch that I like to throw. So let's go over them right now. Let's just start with one of my favorite for fishing deep water. I think one of the areas that a lot of people haven't really grasped onto yet when it comes to vibrating jigs is fishing deep, 15 to 30 foot of water, and a vibrating jig can be really good in that depth, but you got to throw a heavier one. You really need to be fishing one that's at least an ounce, even up to a couple ounces. And one of my favorites for doing that is this guy right here. This is just the Picasso shock blade. Now they make these awfully heavy. They make them up to, I want to say 2 or 2.5 ounces, a really heavy size. But one of the keys with the shock blade is how well this bait actually stays down. It's not just because it's a big heavy amount, but it does have a little bit different of a profile, and it seems to stay lower for me. If I want to be fishing deep and fishing ledges, I want a bait that's going to stay down. I don't want one that's going to rise to the surface with any sort of quick retrieve. And this guy right here is one of my better ones for doing that. Now, there are not that many really heavy vibrating jigs, but the shock blade by Picasso is definitely one that I really like. I want to say they make them up to 2 ounces. Some of the other companies, I think Z-Man makes the jackhammer up to 1.5 ounces. There's a few other really heavy ones made for ledges, but this is the one that I really feel like has performed the best for me. So if I'm fishing TVA lakes, I generally will have a vibrating jig, and this is the one that I have tied on for fishing those deeper ledges. Now, fishing up here, say on the river, what I've found works really well for some of your smallmouth and your river fish are a little bit smaller baits. Now, this is the Mini Max, and then I'll go as small as the, what is this one called? I don't know, it's the tiny one. I'll put the name in the video. I don't even remember what they call it. It's not the mini, but it's the, I think it might be the micro. It's the micro chatterbait. You can see the size comparison. Very, very small. This is an 1/8 ounce. The Mini Max is basically just a smaller profiled bait when compared to just the straight jackhammer. But I do feel like these two baits get a lot of really good bites from smaller streams, smaller river fish, especially if you're fishing around smallmouth or your spotted bass. I do feel like I just get a lot more bites on these. So I definitely have these in my arsenal. I have these tied on pretty much all the time if I'm fishing smaller rivers like the one that I live on, where you're trying to get a bait to float in the current, but also present a smaller bait. Especially up in my neck of the woods, we have a lot of smaller minnows. Emerald shiners are one of the primary forage species, so we don't have big shad. We've got a lot of small minnows, and those seem to work. The micro works really well. The mini max works very, very good as well. But if you're really trying to match that small minnow, the micro does a great job in that. Now, if I'm fishing around wood, I generally like to go with the Slobber Knocker by Berkeley. And I've talked about this before on the channel, but one of the keys to this bait is the connection point. Because it's got the bar across, the hook doesn't rotate as much. So if you're coming through wood, so if you're fishing around stumps, around laydowns, this is so much more snag resistant than, say, a chatterbait or most other vibrating jigs that have a pivot point that allows much more rotation. So if you're trying to get a bait to come through cover better, I really like the Slobber Knocker, specifically wood. So if I'm fishing laydowns or a flat with a bunch of stumps on it, I go with the Slobber Knocker way before I will a standard other lipless bait. Now, I want to point out one thing too here. You probably see on most of these baits, every one I've held up so far, I've got a Berkeley Power Stinger as a trailer. I will say that the Power Stinger is becoming my go-to vibrating jig trailer. It just has such good motion that really helps the bait impart a lot of action. It's just my go-to. You know, there's a bunch of other trailers that people like to use, but for me, it's really becoming my primary trailer to the point where I don't throw too much else. The last thing I want to point out, so those are kind of the standard stock made vibrating jigs that I like to use. But I will say I also really like to throw the Queen Tackle Switchblade, I believe is what it's called. It's a blade that you can pop out and connect baits to it. So I've talked about this again. I'll probably put a link maybe to this video on the end of this so you can see it. But if you want to turn almost anything into a vibrating jig, it's a really good way to attach a blade to make, say, a swim jig into a vibrating jig. So yeah, that's definitely a go-to for me. I do that a lot with, say, your swim baits. I'll do it with the swim jigs. I just do it with a lot of different baits to get the same motion. So even though it's not a standard off-the-shelf, say, vibrating jig, it is the blade that you can make very easily almost anything into it. So that's one that I really like, and I carry a bunch of those in the boat, and I use them all the time. So those are some of my favorite ones. Guys, let me know in the comments section, which ones do you like? You know, I've thrown, Megabass has one I've thrown, Kariji has one that I've thrown. There's a lot of other good, solid ones on the market. I'm not going to sit here and say they're not good. I just don't throw them that much because I have so much confidence in these. There have been a few that I've picked up that I really didn't like over the years. But again, it seems like you can catch fish on most. It really comes down to how good is the erratic motion that the blade and the bait combo makes. Meaning, for me, most of the ones you buy off the shelf vibrate just fine. But I really want ones that when you reel it, they skip and dart on their own. It's almost like they're vibrating, they stop vibrating, and that causes the darting motion. It's that erratic motion that, in my opinion, makes a good vibrating jig. Those are the ones that generate strikes without you having to do anything. If you have to impart all the action, to me, then that's not quite as good of a vibrating jig. And these baits seem to really generate a lot of strikes just on their own. So I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope this answers some of the questions I've gotten from viewers. Let me know if you've got additional follow-up questions. I can try to respond to those as well. Otherwise, guys, I appreciate all you watching. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. Stay tuned. New video coming out tomorrow.